That's Johnny's family there. I've got 7 great-grandchildren.
7 greats? And how many
7
grand?
great-grandchildren.
How many grandchildren?
I had 13. We lost one.
Alright. Just a couple little tweaks and then we'll be good to go.
He was the boy that come with the marriage, Donnie's second marriage. He drowned in the swimming pool.
Oh, was he small? Was he small?
11 years old.
Oh.
They were tying weights on themselves, being macho.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't want to say too much about that because his mother's still not over it.
Oh, well, yeah. Absolutely. And your kids are Dawn,
Bobby,
Bobby,
Johnny,
Johnny.
and Terry. Terry lives in Texas. That was her that just called.
You can actually start whenever you're ready.
Okay. So let's go ahead and get started. This is an interview with Ruth Pew, and this is for our Chandler Municipal Airport project, but we're going to be talking about a little bit more than just the airport and aviation today. Today is January 14th, 2011, and this is Jean Reynolds. This was my introduction for the interview. Ruth, let's talk. We've looked at a lot of your photographs, and you have so much history surrounding you here, and your history goes way back in Chandler. Can you tell me a little bit about the family, as far as who were the first of your family to actually come to Chandler, and when did they come to Chandler?
Well, it goes way back. My grandfather and grandmother were from Norway, but they came over. My grandfather came over first, and then he went back and got my grandmother. And they lived in Minnesota he lived in Minnesota, and then he come out to Tempe and established farming there and a cattle ranch. And then he came to Chandler and bought what they call this fine farm 1 mile north of Chandler. And it did have quite a new home and a barn. It was a dairy barn, but my grandfather was not a dairyman, so he put hay in the barn. He farmed. We had old buck rakes and all that stuff from way back. And so my mother and my aunt moved to Chandler with him because my grandmother had passed away at 26 years old, having her 3rd baby. So anyhow, that's where all of us kids were born, a mile north of Chandler. There were 4 of us, my brother Bruce and Edward, and my sister Maydeen, and then myself. And we had so much fun on that farm. It's unbelievable. And then the first pilot that I ever met was Dave Hewlett, and he lived across the road from my grandfather's back 80 acres. And then the reason I knew Dave is because they had a dairy, and it was south of the Knox Ranch and north of our farm. And he did the crop dusting for my mother's farm. But I was also going to tell you that my grandfather died there on the farm. He had a heart attack. The weather was 120 something, and he had a heart attack and fell in like 6 inches of irrigation water face down. So they pronounced his death as drowning. And then my mother inherited that. So, and my mother and dad split up at one time, and they never did divorce, but they split up a couple of times during my childhood, and but we had so much fun with my dad too, as well as my mother. And my mother's farm happened to be in the flight plan of the Williams Field. The planes, when they took off to the northwest, they would fly over my mother's farm, and so us kids would see all of that. So that even made me more interested in flying, but I'd sit up on top of the barn and watch Dave Hewlett. And I knew someday I was gonna fly. In the back of my mind, I always had that on my mind, that I was gonna fly. And then my brother and I, during World War II, we built those planes out of balsa wood, and my brother had them all hanging up. And so we learned different airplanes, the German and the British Spitfire, and some of those airplanes, we learned all about that. And my mother was very encouraging for us to build those. And then my dad would always take us out to Williams Field. When they had the graduations, we went to some, and then they worked on airplanes out there, and then they'd show them to us. So my dad always took me out there, and we got to see a lot of them. And then I remember I was little, and they would lift me up in the airplane, some of the guys would, and I'd look at the instrument panel, but you know, what I was looking at then and what I look at now, it's a lot different. But anyhow, that I learned to really love flying, just mainly on top of that barn watching all this.
Well, let's go back a little bit. I want to go back to your grandparents again, and maybe get some names and some dates and things like that. What were the name of your grandparents who purchased that 80 acres of land?
It was my grandfather, Ole Olson, and then his wife, Martina, had died in Tempe before he purchased this land. And then he was also in on a cattle ranch, Olson Wash, down by Tucson.
Okay. What were they
on the
growing?
Oracle Road.
What were they growing on the farm there?
We had cotton and hay and grain, and I know when the thrashing machine come in the summer, it was my job to take coffee and cake down to the workers. My mother made a cake every day that I can, every day she made a cake. And I'd have this jug, so she'd know where I was. They had bought this big old hat down in Nogales, about this big, and they'd sit that on my head. And I remember walking with that big old hat down to the field, and that way the guys knew I was coming, and my mother knew that where I was. But I took coffee and cake down to those guys on the thrashing machine. And then we had the cattle. We usually had Ed Ellsworth's cattle on our ranch when we were pasturing. And then we grew grain, and we put a lot of that in the barn so we could feed the animals. And we had the old buck rakes, and now they weren't using those when I got a little older, but we used to go sit on them and play like we were riding down with horses. And then we had this big barn. It was huge, big long barn, and it had shingles on the top. So during World War II, I would get up on the cotton trailer, and I would play like I was entertaining everybody. Every shingle was a person. So I would sing all the World War II songs, and I really thought I was entertaining all those people.
That's very creative. Now, when we talked on the phone, did you say that that Ole came to Chandler in 1904?
I had an article out of the paper that said that Ole Olson bought the Flying Ranch a mile north of Chandler. And it said 1904 on that paper, so,
Okay. Now, how many children did Ole and Martina have? They had three.
two girls, and then she died having her third child, which was a boy.
So that was, what's the name of your mother and your aunt and
My
uncle?
mother was Alfield. She was full-blooded Norwegian. Alfield, Alfield Nevitt. And her sister was Sophie. And the little baby and my grandpa and grandma are buried at the Tempe Butte Cemetery.
So he was born, but he also passed away at the same time as your grandmother? The little boy, the baby?
Yes,
Okay.
One lived 2 days and the other one lived 30 minutes, and I can't remember which one, but I remember it was 2 days and one lived 30 minutes. She was a size 3,
Oh, okay, yeah.
little itty bitty, and he wasn't a great big man, but I have her wedding dress. I still have it, and it was fabulous, beautiful. It was brocade and a little vest deal, and I wore it. I could fit into it when I was in the 6th grade. So she must have been a tiny, tiny little person.
Yeah. So the Olson farm was, or the ranch there was around Ray and Arizona Avenue, you said?
Yes.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
That was like on the northwest corner there?
Yes.
And then you mentioned that the Knoxes also had some land in that area?
The Knoxes, our ranch ran from Ray Road to Knox Road, and then Knox ran from Knox to Warner, I believe. And then my aunt, she traveled and worked, and so she sold the back part of the farm, the 80 acres, she sold that to Orville Knox, and he farmed it. And then when my mother and dad got a divorce, my mother I remember her going down and irrigating even late at night with these big old irrigation boots on. But she finally got Orville Knox to run her farm too.
Okay. So your mom was Alfield, is that correct? Alfield? And what was your father's name?
Mac, John Mac.
So John Mac Nevitt?
Uh-huh.
Okay. And how did they meet and when did they get married?
My dad was a pro ball player, but I think they met in Tempe.
Do you know what year they got married?
No, I don't. I probably got it in some of my records. I know they were married on February 2nd. That was her. I always knew that they were married on February 2nd. And then when my oldest son got married, he was married on February 2nd.
How many years older was Bruce from you?
Bruce was, let's see, 4, 6, and I believe he was 8 years older than me.
So they might have been married in the late 20s maybe, if he was born in, or actually the early 20s maybe? Early 1920s when they got married?
I don't know, I really don't.
Just
Okay.
trying to make a guess based on when your oldest brother.
I know I've got it in a record out in my cedar chest somewhere.
Okay. So once your mom and dad got married, they stayed on the Olson farm and they just helped farming. They stayed and farmed
Yes.
there.
Uh-huh.
And had your grandfather already passed away by that time?
Yes. Uh-huh. Because my daddy and mother were separated, he come back to help her run the ranch. And then they separated again later, and my mother ran the ranch, and then finally, and I remember her running that ranch, but then I guess it got to be too much, and she finally got Orville Knox to come in.
Okay. And you were saying that that you have 3 siblings. You have Bruce is the oldest, and Maydeen, and Edward, right?
And
And then
myself.
yourself. And what year were you born?
I was born in 1932.
Okay. Were you born at home or?
Yes, we were all born in that ranch house right there.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And you have some photographs of that house, right?
Yes.
So, did you live your whole life as far as like when you were growing up until the time, after high school or during high school? Did you always live right there on that?
I lived, born and raised there, and I married Don in 1952. And we moved to a ranch out in Queen Creek.
Okay. Tell me just a couple like memories that you have of growing up on that ranch. I know you talked some about seeing Don Hewlett, who was a pilot, and Dave Hewlett.
Mhm.
And do you have any other memories of growing up on that ranch that you'd like to share?
Well, I remember there were very few cars. We used to lay out on Arizona Avenue and wait for a car to come by. And then we had a great big front porch on that house, and so we would sit out there on that big front porch, and my brother would take the Chevys and the Fords, or else I'd take the Fords and he'd take the Chevys, and we'd sit there and count cars, and sometimes we got up to 6. And then I remember the big San Marcos Hotel people, they would come by on their way from Phoenix to the San Marcos, and we would guess who was coming, and then we'd read it in the little 2-page Chandler, Arizona the next week. But I remember I had a hard-working mother. She really worked hard and washed with we had a little washroom out back. It used to be an old pump house. And they took the pump house and made it in, because we got different kind of water then, and they took the pump house and I got to make a playhouse up there. And it had a pipe through it from an old water pipe. So I used to put my brother's saddle over that, and I'd sit up there and I'd see out, and I'd ride 1,000 miles on that saddle. I was a cowgirl from the day I was born.
Yeah.
I loved horses. But I remember the old clothesline was always full of clothes. My mother was so clean and just such a hard-working woman. And we never asked what there was to eat. She always had something. And when she didn't feel good, sometimes we had bread pudding, but oh, it was so good. And we had a fireplace, and we popped popcorn. And she told me that my grandpa was such a Norwegian that his language was off a little, and he'd say, "Yump, gosh darn you, yump," when the popcorn started popping. And then I remember my grandfather, he had a new Buick, and I believe Doc Chandler had a new Buick too. Doc Chandler had a car, my grandfather had a really nice Buick. And I remember he would take my brothers and sister to school, and I got to ride with him up to the schoolhouse. And I remember standing up in the car with my arms around him. And I loved that grandpa.
Mm-hmm.
And my daddy never wanted me to ride a horse. But my grandpa used to lift me up on the neck of the horse, and I'd hold on to, I can't think of the word right now. I was up on the neck of that horse, holding on to those. And my daddy, he did not want me riding horses. So one time I rode a horse down, we had a lane and beside the field, and I rode the horse down beside the lane. And then I remember he come running over there, and so my horse kind of start jumping around. So he took a hold of me and grabbed me, and he whacked me so hard on the butt that I ended up on the other side of the horse. But he did not want me riding horses.
Did you feel like you were too small, or it was because you were a girl?
I have no idea. He
Oh.
just hated horses.
Okay.
And I remember one night, he had to bring some horses in from the field, and they got loose from him. And they run down a bank, pulling a disc. And he was petrified, I was petrified. But I just knew that he did not like horses.
Okay.
So I guess I rode down there against his wishes.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned Dr. Chandler, and of course, he's the founder of Chandler. What do you remember about Dr. Chandler?
I just remember this white-headed man, but I knew Dr. Chandler's wife a little bit better. And I remember her. She had a little cane, and she'd walk up in front of the San Marcos up to the stores.
Was that Rosa?
Beautiful little woman.
Was her name Rosa?
I don't remember her name right now, but I knew that was Mrs. Dr. Chandler. We never called her by her first name. It was Dr. Chandler's wife.
So you went to Chandler High?
Yes.
Is that correct? What do you remember about your time in high school?
Fun, just fun. Everything that was fun, we did. And I held a lot of offices when I was in Chandler High School. And probably more than anybody ever will, because they don't let them hold offices anymore unless your grades are a certain level. And when I was elected, I sometimes, my grades weren't that great or up to par, but I was still elected. And then after I quit school, they had to start making really good grades before they'd let them hold an office. But I remember we had the proms at the gymnasium until I was a sophomore, and then we had one at the San Marcos. Then I remember ditch day. Our class decided we were going to go to the Grand Canyon and spend the night. It was going to be more than just a ditch day. So we got our own sponsors, and we spent 2 nights at the Grand Canyon and had a great bus driver. And but our class spent 2 nights at the Grand Canyon. I remember Sue Sossman and Shirley, can't remember her last name. They walked to the bottom of the canyon. I walked down 3 miles, and I kept saying, I wonder what everybody else is doing up at the top. And so I knew they were having a lot of fun at the top, so we turned around and walked back out. And so we could have the day with the rest of them.
It wasn't Shirley Austin, was it?
Pardon me?
Shirley Austin?
No.
She graduated.
No, I knew
around then.
Shirley too. No, it was Sally. Sally, not Shirley, it was
Oh, okay.
Sally.
Oh, cool.
Sally Dory. Sally Dory. She and Sue Sossman walked. They were the only 2. They walked clear to the bottom.
And all the way back up, of course.
And then they come up about dark, or after dark. But we had just been having all kinds of fun all day. So I only walked down 3 miles.
And what year did you graduate from Chandler
And
High?
I graduated in 51.
So we had referenced earlier World War II, and maybe you could tell me a little bit about your brother Bruce, because he served in World War II, right?
Yes, he went in the Navy. I think it was 42. He went in the U.S. Navy, and he was stationed at Connecticut, over on the East Coast, the submarine base, where I guess he was in training, and then he went to the Pacific. But he used to come home. He came home before he left for the Pacific. And I remember he brought us, because we could not buy chewing gum, and he brought us a case of chewing gum. So boy, did we love to see him come. And then I remember when he was released, and he and Corley Hagerton knew each other. And Corley's from Chandler. So I would sit out by the road, and there was 2 fence posts with a board across. And I'd sit on that and wait day after day after day for them to come in. And then I remember the bus stopping, and I didn't know Corley was coming with Bruce, but Corley got off the bus too. And how happy I was that 2 sailors, my brother was home.
Mm-hmm.
And he saved money while he was in the service, and he bought a semi-truck. So he used to haul flagstone and all kinds of things with his truck when he got home.
Mm-hmm. And he was on a submarine, you said?
Yes, submarine. And I think it was a USS Angler, and I know I read a couple of the battles that they were in. And then we had a picture that was a painting in the, I don't know which, South China Sea, I believe it was called. And he said they torpedoed the Hiroshima's little shack over somewhere. And I remember that was a bad situation, a battle there, but he came home from them.
Mm-hmm. Did he tell you what his position was?
He ran the engines.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, when he went in, he was, what, 16, 17? They were so young. And then one time when he came home on furlough, he brought a guy that was 35 years old, and they called him the old man. And he was a daddy on the submarine.
Mm-hmm.
And these, you know, when you stop and think about the greatest generation, they were all 16, 17, 18, and 19-year-old kids. And some of the 16-year-olds lied about their age because they wanted to go.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to fight for our country.
So how did you feel having a big brother who was serving in the Pacific and during the war?
Oh, I was so proud. And Mr. Tate, Forrest Tate, but it was his dad, was our mailman. Again, I spent hours and hours out by the road waiting for him to come because I knew someday we were going to get a letter from my brother. And I remember how happy I was. And he would wave that letter. He knew I was getting a letter from my brother. And the excitement, I'd run through the pasture and give that letter to my mother. And then I found out later, we didn't know this at the time, but they had a code. And if my brother wrote home and said, "How is Aunt Sophie?" After the car wreck, we knew that was Australia. Or how is another aunt? Then we knew he was somewhere else. And then he had 4 or 5 aunts, and Mom knew. She knew which area he was in, only because of when he could get a letter home that a certain aunt was in a car wreck. That was their code. And I thought that was pretty smart for a mother and a son to do that.
Mm-hmm. That was very clever.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. That's a neat story to tell. I like that. Okay, so when you were in high school, and we're going to get to your rodeo career a little later after we talk about the aviation, but when you were in high school, did you, ride at all, or were you involved at all with that?
I rode a few times, borrowed Orville Knox's horse, big old white horse, and I rode that horse around the road some. And then I went out to Queen Creek, and they had a horse out there. His name was DeLoss, which was named after DeLoss Ellsworth. And I rode that horse in Queen Creek some in high school. And then they had a teenage club. I mean, we had a wonderful teenage club in high school. I wish every teenager could have a club like we had. And Mrs. George Fry was our sponsor over all of it. And we'd go down and clean the club, and then we'd dance that night, but I remember I was elected rodeo queen of that teenage club, and oh, I was so proud. Is it wrong to be so proud of so many things? But I've been so proud all my life of things.
Was it called the Teenage Club, or did it have a certain name to it?
We just called it the teenage club.
And was it like a little separate place where you could go?
It was the old women's club building.
Okay, where was that at?
That was on either the second or the third road behind the old Chevron station.
Off of,
Is it called, what's the streets that go east and
well, you would have
north and south?
North and south, and on the east side of Arizona Avenue or the west side?
The east.
The east side. So you would have Washington and Colorado.
I think it was Colorado Street.
Okay.
There was a women's club there, and I don't know if they didn't use it anymore. They must have had another one, because we took control of that thing.
Yeah.
We'd go clean it and everything,
Mhm.
and that was our teenage club.
Okay. I bet you anything that they eventually turned that little building into kind of a little recreation, a little later, turned it into kind of a recreation center for kids. 'Cause I think that's in the same
I
area.
remember, but boy, we sure had a lot of good friendships there. You know, and when I was in school, we knew everybody in school. And we knew not only them, we knew their parents. And how we loved every parent. We loved the parents that come to the games, that sponsor our dances, that come to our teenage hall at times. And we made floats out in my mother's barn for our parades. And you know, and the parents had come, and we were mixed together, all of us. And that's what was really nice back in our day. We had some really neat parents.
Okay. So, so you graduated in 1951, and then what did you do after you finished high school?
I went to ASU for one semester, and then I married Don. All I wanted to be was a rancher's wife. And I really, truly loved Don, so I wanted to finish school, really to please my mother, and yet I was ready to be a housewife. So I married Don, and we moved to Queen Creek for 1 year, and then we bought a farm out on Bella Vista Road. And then my mother later bought that ranch for my brother, and then we moved to Chandler in '59.
Okay. So your husband was Don Pew.
My husband was Don Eugene Pew.
Okay, and Pew is P-E-W.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you were married in 1952?
52, March 1952.
Okay. How did you meet Don?
It was a blind date. Monty and Allie Ellsworth introduced us, and then I was a head majorette of Chandler High School, so we had a game in Tolleson, Arizona. So Don drove his car over, and I got permission from my mother and the school to ride back home with Don and his sister. And I remember I had that majorette uniform on, and I was sitting in the front seat. Don was driving, and the majorette costume come up a little bit high, and I kept trying to pull that down. But anyhow, he was a great guy. You know, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, which I loved, and he was a good father. But things ended later, but
So, so once you guys got married, what kind of work was he doing? He was farming?
He
or-
was farming,
So,
Yeah.
what took you out to Queen Creek?
Well, I knew Don in high school since I was a sophomore in high school. And I remember his dad was farming and him out at Queen Creek. And I used to go out and tromp trailers and, the cotton, and I did all that when we were in high school, just for the fun of it. And then we did a lot of that even after we were married. And, but we farmed.
Okay. So you were in Queen Creek area for about a year, you said?
We lived in the town of Queen Creek for
Okay.
about a year, and then we bought a farm, and we moved out on the farm, which was the very end of Bella Vista Road. Right across from my house was the desert, and I absolutely loved it out there. But when my kids started school, I wanted them to go to Chandler School. So I really encouraged Don to move to Chandler so our kids could start school there. So he sold that farm, he and his dad, and they bought a farm in Maricopa. So a lot of the flying was down to Maricopa.
And where were you living in Chandler?
On West Toledo Street. And then my mother lived on West Erie. So I was closer to her, which made me feel good because of my little ones. In fact, Johnny got away one day. My mother called and said, "Where's Johnny?" And I said, "He's in the backyard playing." And she said, "Are you sure?" And I said, "Yeah, I just put him out there not too long ago. And the gate's locked." Well, she said, "Well, he's here." He come knocking on the door, pushing his stroller. And he's knocking on the door and he's here. He had gone down this dirt road and over to her house, pushing that stroller. And he had got a chair and got up and unlocked the gate. So I understand a lot of these parents now that lose children in swimming pools and things, what kids can't do. He got up and unlocked the gate, pushed his stroller and went to Grandma's.
So, so you have 4 children,
Yes,
and you have Donnie. When was he born? What year was he born?
Donnie was born in March 22nd of 53. He was born the day after my birthday.
And then-
So when I was under all that anesthetic having him, I was celebrating the biggest birthday party that ever was.
Your first baby. What about Bobby? When was he born?
Bobby was born January 5th, 1955.
Okay. And Johnny?
And Johnny was born January 20th, 1959. He was born the day that we moved to Chandler. And I was in the hospital having him, and Don and a group of guys, and my mother. By the time I got out of the hospital, I was all set up in Chandler, and my mother had everything put up just exactly like I would have used it. I came home from the hospital and they had done it all.
Wow.
It was nice.
And what about Terry?
Terry was born on November 12th, 1963, and that's after we bought the 10 acres out on Willis Road.
Now, tell me how it was that you got involved in aviation. If it's your husband first, or how you actually got involved with flying and with aviation.
Great break spots. Hold on, stand by. I got 2 minutes left on this battery here. So if we can just wait a second. Feel free to grab some water if you need some. Mrs. Pew. Let's see.
We're going to be giving you a copy of this interview that we do.
Oh,
So I like to get a lot of detail of the family history, because then you're gonna have that, you
for
know.
the family.
Yeah.
A little change now since we're starting a new topic, so it's this way.
Yeah, I didn't mention that Dave Lamro had an airplane, and he was probably 3 miles east of my mother's ranch. And I used to see him fly over every now and then too.
Now, was Dave Hewlett, was that H-U-L-E-T?
You know, I don't
Yes.
know, I just remember it was Hewlett.
Yeah, those are the people that bought the Knox Farm that the school sits on.
Mhm.
And then you're the first person that finally gave me more information about that Mrs. Fry was in charge of that youth
Yes.
center. Because I worked for the school district and we did a history on and I was trying to find someone that knew about that because I had like a little bit from the
I knew
newspaper.
her
It's awesome.
so well. We used to go to her house and visit. Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
And I knew her husband, George, too.
Mhm.
And I knew her daughter, Willowbelle.
Yeah.
And Etta Mae married Dwayne Ellsworth.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know all that bunch real well. In fact, I was just asking about Lori Ellsworth. I know she inherited all of Dwayne and Etta Mae's properties, but, they had a lot of it up in Pine Top. I rode Dwayne's horses up in Pine Top with Jerry Wells too.
Mhm.
Now, so how did I get interested in farming?
And we are.
Yes?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, so yeah, talk a little bit about how was it that you got involved in actually, you know, in aviation? Was it through your husband or, you know, just tell me a little bit about that.
Well, after I married Dawn.
I apologize. I'm sorry. I just want to make sure before you start if that's your scarf or my tea. Let's see. I think it's just your scarf. Okay.
Is it the
It's
scarf
actually-
okay?
No, it looks beautiful. Yes. Okay. It's her skin. Okay, go ahead.
Well, from watching all the Air Force and going to Williamsfield a lot when I was little and knowing Dave Hewlett and Dave Lamrell and then some of the other people were flying, the Snaps in Queen Creek and Morris Enlow. And so after I married Don, then he went in and took his lessons. And he soloed at Lazy 8. And then he bought a tri-pacer airplane. It was a tricycle landing gear. And we had so much fun in that little airplane, but we'd fly in from the ranch and park it at Chandler, and we kept a car out there, and we'd go into different places. Mainly my mother, she lived in Chandler. And of course, still out on the ranch. And the kids had to go to the doctor, we'd take them in, and we just used that little airplane a lot. We had a lot of fun in it. And then I decided that I was gonna solo, so I soloed at Lazy 8 in 1956, and my instructor was Jack Russell. And Jack Russell flew the B-29s in World War II. So, I, could relate stories to him about Williamsfield, and so anyhow, we always had a conversation going, and so I felt real comfortable flying with him. And we took the Tri-Pacer as far as our first convention, which was in Fort Collins, and we had so much fun in that. And then when we moved to Chandler in 1959, or then Don sold the Tri-Pacer, and he sold it to the Maiden Form Bra Company. And he come in laughing and he said they knew lift when they saw it. So then in 1959, we moved to Chandler. And my brother took over the farm in Queen Creek. And then we had a farm in Maricopa. So Don got the Cessna 182 and he would fly to Maricopa every day. And so we did a lot of flying back and forth. And then when the kids started school, like when Donnie was in the first grade, then he couldn't fly that early morning. So I'd pick him up from school and take him down to the ranch so he could be with his daddy and all. So anyhow, then we took the 182 to all of the conventions from then on. We flew to a lot of them in the United States. And you just learn to love the people that you meet at the conventions and how much fun they are. I was telling John Walkup when I first saw him in Chandler, I said, "John, I know your dad Hoyt. I met him in Oklahoma City." He said, "Yeah, that's right." And then I was elected Flying Farmer Queen in 1961. And I felt good about it that year because we were going to have the national convention in Tucson. So we had a lot of meetings to go to, and that was a lot of hard work in some of that. But we did go to a lot of meetings in Tucson. I would fly with Max Sneff, who was the vice president, and Norris Enlow, who was the president. And then some of the meetings, Don would take me. And then Carolyn Sneff and I, we decided we were going to go to the Buckeye to a meeting. It was the ladies' meeting on the convention tea that we were going to have. So we flew her and her husband's 172. We took that down. And as we were coming in for a landing, we looked down and we saw this plane go end over end, and so they motioned for us to go around. So Carolyn and I circled and circled, and finally they waved us to come on in. So we landed, and we just were parking the plane, and this guy come over and told Carolyn, open the window, and she opened the window, and he said, "Can a couple of you gals teach an old crop duster how to fly?" But we never got over that. We just died laughing about that. But then at the convention, I felt really good about the convention being in Arizona the year that I was queen. And I bought a cup and saucer for our tea. And I had to go many places to find enough beautiful cups and saucers. And then as they would pick their cup and saucer, the one that they liked the best, they'd pick it out, and then they got to we had it at the tea, and then they'd take it home with them. That was my gift to them. Mm-hmm. And I got many, many letters in my scrapbook over there from the queens of different states thanking me for their beautiful cup and saucer.
Was that convention held in Chandler?
Tucson.
Oh, in Tucson, okay.
That's why we had all those trips to make to Tucson.
Gotcha. Let's go back to the 50s before we get into the flying farmer part of your history. I want to talk about training to learn to fly. And what was it that made you guys decide to train with the Lazy 8 company?
Tugwalks. They were the flying. That's because they were the flying. They did our crop dusting, and they were the flying unit out there. And then in 50, I think it was 4 or something like that, that Bob Copeland came in. And we thought a lot of him and Jean. In fact, after I was rodeoing and I was training horses, I would go out and use the arena that was at the airport, and I would cross there and train horses on the barrels in that arena and then ride back home. And every once in a while I'd be riding down the road or in a field, and Bob Copeland would be crop dusting, and he would come by and say, "Move over, move over." And I knew he was telling me to move over, get out, I'm gonna crop dust this field. But I couldn't tell if he had a frown on his face or a smile, but I bet he had a frown.
What do we don't know a lot about Tug walks, and I'm wondering if you could tell me a little bit about what you know about him.
I knew Tug and Maxine, and I thought a lot of them too. I've been to her house, and Tug was doing our spraying for us, and they had a real pretty daughter that I used to talk a lot with, and I thought they were a great couple.
Okay. Can you describe for me what your flying training was like? Well,
I loved it. I loved it. And after I got into where I was really starting to, get pretty good at it, I ended up in St. Joe's Hospital for 6 weeks with meningioencephalitis. And it took me about a year to get over all of that. So by that time, I'm just flying with Don. In fact, we went to a convention at the end of that year, or that summer. Mm-hmm. And so my flying from then on was in his airplane, in Don's 182. Mm-hmm. And but we've had a lot of great flying days. I remember we flew and took my mother and my kids, and Don leased a 205 and to put us all in, and we went to Seattle to the World's Fair. And I remember flying a lot of the way up there. And then we got to Seattle and we went up in the Space Needle. And they hadn't quite finished. They still had a wire cage for the elevator. And I was standing in that wire cage, and the thing went whoop, real fast. And I got so sick at my stomach. And everybody was laughing and said, "Ruth, you did half the flying up here, and you get in this thing and you get sick." But it was still a wire cage. I never will forget that. I did not like that little ride up at all.
So for those of us who have never flown, which would be me, first of all, what kind of plane did you train in when you took your instruction?
I trained in a J3 Cub, and mighty small.
Can you describe what that was like, learning to fly?
It was a little nerve-wracking, but Jack Russell made me feel, comfortable. He was my instructor. I had never seen him again. I don't know what's happened to Jack. I was asking Bob if he knew, Bob Copeland, and he didn't remember Jack at all. But I know he worked with Tug walks. And then there was another flying service. Oh, when I first soloed, I thought, well, I'm up here if I can just get it down. And I did fine. Mm-hmm. And the same nerves came over when my boys soloed too. I was nervous for them. And in fact, Johnny, when he went out and soloed the morning of his birthday, 16 years old, he was coming in for a landing from the north. And Mr. Bergeson, as much as I love the Bergesons, came in flying in, and he flew in the wrong direction. And here's my son in this 150 landing, and I just started having a heart attack, And T.E. Settle, his instructor, said, "Don't worry about Johnny, he knows what to do." And Johnny all of a sudden just moved over and let him have the strip. He went up and around. I was so proud of that kid.
That's good.
And, but Mr. Ferguson, I don't know, but I love that family, so I never told the story too many times that I love those people. In fact, I still see Mrs. Ferguson every once in
Is
a while.
that Willie Ferguson?
Mhm.
We're gonna be interviewing her too, so.
Yes, I thought you probably would.
Yeah. So, you were learning to fly. This is 1956, right, when you got your license. How many other women were out there learning to be pilots at that time?
The only ones I remember at that time was Carolyn Snaff and myself. And I think Thora finally learned to land the plane, Thora Snaff. And, but I have my solo award over here that I got at the Flying Farmer Convention. And I was real proud of that too. Lycone presented those.
Okay.
But it was kind of nerve-wracking, but, and even in our 182, you know, when we'd take off and go into country that I didn't know, but I'm a rock person, as you can tell by my house. All the rocks, these are God's artwork. I don't need a famous artist to enjoy what I've got in my house. All my rocks are just, to me, they're God's artwork. And so we flew over mountains a lot, and that was always kind of exciting to know that God made that, you know, and to see them spread. You know, you can just see forever, and I love that.
So you had you were mentioning the 182 and then later the 172, and is that what kind of, I guess, model of plane?
Well, the Tri-Pacer was a tricycle landing gear.
Okay.
The others were conventional, but we didn't own them. That was Carolyn's 172.
Okay.
And
Is that like a, I don't know planes, so is that like
it's
a
just
Cessna?
a little smaller than the 182. But we sold our 182 to Dale Smith, who was a professional Rodeo Cowboy Association president for several years. And he had a ranch in Kingman. And he went up to Kingman, and it had rained, and a gully was there, and he didn't know it. And he hit that gully, and it flipped him end over end. So he told the story of when he left Chandler. He's kept the plane at Chandler. He told the story when he left Chandler. He thought, when I get back, I'm gonna have to put some new interior on this seating. It's getting a little rough. So he goes up and he cracks the plane up, and he goes running out, and he waits, and he's waiting for it to blow, and he said it didn't blow, so he went back over and turned the key off and run back again. And he said then it didn't do anything, so he went back and he said, you know, that interior was the best part of that whole airplane. And there he was gonna have it redone when he got back to Chandler. But every month I would take one of my children on a trip that they wanted to go on, just a day trip. And like Donnie liked for me to take him to all the auto parts places. Well, let me tell you, friend, they didn't have Pep Boys and Auto Zones and all that stuff. I had to take him to Phoenix, once to Tucson, and different places where there were auto parts. And then that was what he wanted to do. And Bobby liked ball games, so I took Bobby to the Chicago Cubs, and they lifted him over the fence, and they signed the ball. We've got it with Ron Santo, Dick Ellsworth, and all the famous Chicago Cubs. Then I took Johnny, and we were gonna go to Deer Valley, but we went by the Scottsdale Airport, and he said, look, there's our airplane. and it's crashed. So I drove over by the fence and we stopped and we got out. And 95 Foxtrot, that's our airplane, was laying in 5 pieces. Johnny kind of started to cry a little. And he said, I always had hopes of buying that plane back. And I said, so you could fly your daddy like he flew you? And he said, yeah, and then he really cried. So anyhow, that was a sad day for us. But I kept thinking, how's Dale? So I called Dale when I got home, and he told me the story of when he left Chandler, about he was going to have the seat covers all covered and look nice, and then he said when he ran over, he really looked it over. He thought that the best looking part about that whole airplane was the seat covers. So, but anyhow.
Where did you keep your plane at? Your planes that you had?
The plane, the 182, we had it parked in Chandler for just a short time. And then Don got permission, because we lived on Toledo Street, to leave it at Ed Ellsworth's place. But I remember going out and getting in it. There was only one other airplane parked by it. And I don't know if it was the Bergesons or just whose it was, but I remember. But we only kept it there a short time. But we landed there all the time for different things. We were always at the Chandler Airport.
And so, you know, kind of starting in the 50s when you did your training, and then you would continue to use the airport to fly in, to come into Chandler when you're farther out east. Can you describe for us what you remember the airport looking like?
Well, if I can go way back to 47 and 48 when I was in high school, this friend of my brother, Billy Earl Nall, he had a new car, and his parents had a new car, and they let him have it. And so we went out to the Chandler Airport, and there was nothing but the Lazy 8 operation. And then they had horse races north of that, which I attended. And then, but anyhow, back to the 47, 48, when I was a freshman in high school, there was nothing on the west side. But that was still Chandler Airport to us. So we'd take that car out after it rained, and we'd do wheelies. Perfect ground. It would just throw mud everywhere, but it wasn't soft enough to get stuck in. And we would, next time it rained, away we'd go back out there and do wheelies at the airport. And then in high school, I went to the horse races there north of Lazy 8, which was still part of Chandler Airport. And I remember Jim and John Hamilton racing their horses, and Jess Cheek. And I remember Ishmael Honey was the jockey. And how we enjoyed, because they brought horses in from all over around Arizona. Somebody that thought they had the fastest horse, they brought the horse. It was like the old Saturday and Sunday, way back when, horse races.
Like a straightaway?
And it was just north of the Lazy 8. And then they built the arena, and of course I was training horses then, and so I would go out there, and then I would enter, I would go out because the Mounted Patrol had ropings out there 1 or 2 nights a week, and I went to all of those too, Dawn and I both. And our kids their kids went with us almost everywhere.
Okay.
And Donnie soloed at Lazy 8, and, or not Lazy 8, no, I'll go back on my story. As I was riding down the canal bank, I looked over and I saw the old Rod and Gun Club, which we used to go to, had turned into the Aero Aviation, and it was run by T.E. and Virginia Suttle. And so I'd stop in every once in a while and have a Coke with them and talk and visit. And then I decided that it was time for Johnny to fly, or start learning how. So I took him to TE in Virginia. And Donnie also had his lessons there from TE in Virginia at what we call the Aero Aviation. And they were a very nice couple, and I think I gave the museum their picture. I thought their picture ought to be put up somewhere at the Chandler airport because they were there quite a while and they pumped gas, and Johnny got a job there with them and made some money for his lessons. And then later on, after he learned to fly, he went to work for Bob Copeland. So our family's been tied in with the Chandler airport half my life or more than that.
Yeah, definitely.
And so,
That was Aero?
the Aero Club.
Okay, and that, where was the old Rod and Gun Club?
It was on the west side. This is after our Wheelie deal.
Mhm.
It was over on the west side, and then also they had barbecues, and we used to go to all the barbecues. And I remember one time they barbecued a bear, and I thought that's the greasiest meat I had ever ate in my life, but it was still fun. Everybody was there and having fun. And then Donnie and Bobby, and I'm not sure, but I think maybe Johnny too, took their lessons there for gun control. And so we could take them deer hunting with us. But I wanted to know for sure how to handle a gun.
Now, was that in a specific building? Do you remember what the building looked like?
Yes, it was an old wooden building, but not old wooden building, but it was a wooden building. And I think it's about where the tower is now, along in there. And then, of course, they start building hangars out there, and my son Donnie keeps his plane out there yet. He has an Aero Commander. So I'm at his space, and then I have lunch out there. And when I lived on the 10 acres, I was eating breakfast out there a lot, just to be around the boys and family. And then I ended up as Grandma Ruthie. And I have a grandson that learned to fly last year out at Williams Air Force Base, Cody Joe Pew. And then now I'm a great-grandmother to 7 great-grandchildren, and I can say it's been a wonderful, wonderful time.
I'm gonna go back to the Rod and Gun Club building. Did that later become a terminal building for Chandler?
I don't know if they ever, I know it was called the Aero Club, and Virginia and T.E. Subtle run that. And Johnny worked there and took his lessons, and Donnie took his lessons there first. And then I don't know if they tore the building down, but I know they built a tower, but I think it was one of those buildings, this side of the tower, or along in there.
Did it have a unique fireplace or anything inside of it?
No, I don't remember that.
Okay.
It just was a wooden building, as I remember.
Since we don't really have any pictures of the airport at that time, there's a lot of descriptions that people are giving me, so I'm trying to create an image of, what exactly was out there and what those buildings were. Since all that's gone, it's hard to do that if you don't have like a photograph or something, so.
No, I don't. If we did, it would be slides. And I will check with my son, Johnny, because he has all the family slides now. They were gonna put them on DVDs, but we haven't got around to doing that yet.
So when you were just in the 50s, when you were involved at the airport, was it kind of just like a gravel strip and just the Lazy 8?
I remember it as just being a dirt strip.
Dirt strip, okay. So not much there.
No, little Lazy 8 building over there, And then I remember the horse races, we went out there in high school too. And then the rodeo grounds came in. The rodeo grounds, the original rodeo grounds was on Williamsfield Road.
And what?
And about where Jake and Reddy Neely used to live. It would be, I'd have to show you, but that's the original rodeo grounds.
Okay.
And then they moved from there to,
Was it Cooper and Williamsfield Road,
it
or
wasn't
farther
as,
east?
it wasn't as far as Cooper, it was just like a half a mile down Williamsfield.
And then the rodeo grounds were located where, near the airport?
Then it was on the northeast. And then they moved them later after, I had almost quit rodeo